Okay, let's get started. Let's try. Okay, with this class, again, like I said, I'll do evens with you guys. So you guys are going to turn in the even numbers. All right, let's get started with number 2, right? This should be a fairly simple one, right? What should be your instinct with all of these? Check if you can do what to it? Factor, right? Can you factor something like this? Are there numbers that multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 4? Yeah, right? What are they? All right, so we're going to have x minus 6 and x plus 2, right? Negative 6 times 2 is going to get us negative 12. When you add them, you should get negative 4. All right, equals 0. All right, what do we do now? Good, you set each factor equal to 0. So you get x plus 6 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0. All right, so you subtract 6 from both sides. You should get x equals 6 as one of your answers. All right, and then you should get, all right, subtract 2 from both sides. You should get x equals negative 2 as your other answer. All right, so let's try number 4 now. All right, how are we going to do this one? Okay, I wouldn't do that yet, though.
Take the 4 off.
Okay, we can, yeah, good. So I would divide both sides by 4. Right, I would get the x squared by itself. Right, and it works here because on one side we have a squared, and on the other side we just have a constant. There's no extra x's lying around. So you can do this, right? 4 divided by 4 cancels out, and you get x squared equals 12 divided by 4 gets you 3. All right, and then to get rid of that squared, oh, you were there, sorry. Okay, to get rid of that squared, we can square root both sides. And the square root and the square are going to cancel. So we get x equals, is it just square root of 3? Plus or minus, right? Don't forget the plus or minus. So you get x equals plus or minus square root of 3. Right, I think some of you like to square root first, right, and then simplify. That wouldn't be wrong. You just have to take a couple more steps to simplify your answer. Right, so just to bypass that, just get the x squared by itself right away. All right, so now let's try number 6. All right, again, how are you going to do this one? We can, yeah, I would add 36 to both sides, right? I see an x squared, so I would try to get it by itself. Right, so add 36, and then you get 3x squared equals 36, and what can you do now?
Divide by 3 and then square root it.
Very good, I would divide by 3 and then square root, right? So we get x squared equals 36 divided by 3 should get you 12, and then square root. All right, the square root and the square cancel out. We get x equals plus or minus the square root of 12. Is this our final answer? You can simplify the radical, right? So always make sure your radicals are fully simplified, right? Separate the 12 into the square root of 4 and the square root of 3, and the square root of 4 is going to get you 2. So we get x equals plus or minus 2 square root of 3. Okay, so I want to try number 8 by using the quadratic formula. I wouldn't do completing the square for this, right? Does anyone know why? Yeah, there's something in front of the x squared. If you have a choice to use it, and you see a number in front, so I wouldn't use completing the square if there's a number in front of the x squared, or if your b term is odd, right? Because then you're going to get a fraction, and you have to square a fraction, and then you have to deal with adding fractions and whole numbers, and you guys don't like that, right? So I would just use quadratic formula. Right, so to use quadratic formula, we need to label A, B, and C. Right, so A is the number in front of x squared, so it's going to be 2. B is in front of the x, so it's going to be -4, and C is your constant, so 1. All right, do we remember the quadratic formula? X equals... All right, what's after that? X equals...
Plus or minus negative b.
It's going to be, okay, negative b plus or minus.
Square root.
Square root.
B squared. 4ac.
Minus 4ac
Over 2a.
over 2a. So over 2, yeah, 2a. All right, you need to commit this to memory. Right, if you know this formula and you know a, b, and c, you just need to plug in a, b, and c into your equation so you can get your answer. Right, so we're going to get x equals -4 is just going to be a +4, plus or minus the square root of -4 squared, minus 4 times 2 times 1 over 2 times 2. Right, just plug in a, b, and c. Right, so now when you simplify this, we should get 4 plus or minus the square root. -4 squared is 16. Minus 4 times 2 times 1 is 8. Over 2 times 2, which is 4. Right, and then 16 minus 8 should get you 8. So we get 4 plus or minus the square root of 8. Over 4. All right, what do we want to do now?
Cancel out the 4.
I wouldn't do that yet. You can simplify a little bit. All right, what are we going to simplify first?
The square root.
Okay, let's simplify the square root. All right, square root of 8 we can turn into the square root of 4, square root of 2. And the square root of 4 becomes 2. All right, so we get 4 plus or minus 2 square root of 2. Over 4, right? And now we can simplify a little further. Right? If you're able to simplify, you should do it. Right? And if you can't recognize when to simplify, you can always just split it up into 2 fractions. Right, so if your denominator is 4, you can split the top into 2 fractions with 4 as the denominator. Right, and 4 divided by 4 gets you 1. All right, plus or minus 2 and 4 are going to simplify. Right, 2 becomes 1, 4 becomes 2. Right, so plus or minus the square root of 2 over 2. All right, and that would be your answer for this one. All right, now let's try number 10. All right, so we want to solve this one using the quadratic formula. All right, but before we do that, we need to make sure the entire equation is set equal to what?
0.
To 0. Good, right? So let's do that. Let's subtract 10 on both sides. And then we get 3x squared plus 2x minus 10 equals 0. All right, and now we can label A, B, and C, right? So what's A?
3.
3. What's B? And what's C?
-10.
Very good. So if you know A, B, and C, and you know the quadratic formula, this should be very easy. right? So from here, you just want to plug it in. So x equals negative b, so negative 2, plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 10, all over 2 times 3. All right, so we get x equals negative 2, simplifying under that radical. 2 squared is 4, right? Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. Negative 12 times negative 10 should get you good. Positive 120. Oh, jumped ahead. All right, over 2 times 3 is 6. All right, and simplify under that radical just a little bit more. So we get negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 124 over 6. All right, so now let's simplify the radical. All right, how can we simplify the square root of 124? Right, so we can do square root of 4 and square root of 31. And the square root of 4 is going to get you 2. Square root of 31, you can't do anything else to that. So we get x equals negative 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 31 over 6. All right, we can simplify a little bit more. How?
1/3.
Okay, yeah, we can simplify to 1/3, right? So let's split up the fractions. All right, and negative 2 over 6 becomes negative 1 over 3. All right, and then the same thing with this 2 and this 6, right? It becomes the square root of 31 over 3.
Would you take the answer if we had just left it like the first one?
If you left it like this, I might take a little bit off, but nothing crazy. Right, because you did all the steps right, you just need to simplify. We need to simplify it all the way. Okay, so now let's try number 12 on the next page. All right, how are we going to solve this one? What's the best way to do it? Okay, good, right? We have an x squared, right? It's only an x squared and some other numbers. All right, so we can get the squared term by itself. All right, so we can subtract 128 from both sides. All right, and then we get 2x squared equals negative 128. All right, what else can we do? Okay, we can divide. Okay, yeah, let's divide 2. Very good. All right, so dividing 2, we get x squared equals negative 128 divided by 2. What should that get you?
64.
All right, negative 64. Good. All right, now what can we do? All right, I have a square on one side, a number on the other. We can do what to both sides? Square root. All right, good. Square root both sides. We get x equals, there's an issue here. What's under the radical? Okay, good. There's a negative under the radical. If there's a negative under the radical, right, keep in mind we have both sections, right, 1.4 and 1.5. If there's a negative under the radical, you need to take it out, make it an I, right, and then have I, square root of 64, right, and you always need the plus or minus. And then square root of 64 you can simplify. So it becomes plus or minus 8i. All right, another thing to mention, you could use quadratic formula here. As long as the problem says solve, you could quadratic formula your way through the entire test, right? But that's not the best way to go about it. Some of them, quadratic formula is going to take a really long time. Right? If you were to use quadratic formula, what would A, B, and C be? All right, so a is in front of our x squared. So 2. Do we have a b term? Yes, no? There's no b term, right? So we can just say b is 0. And then c is 128. All right, that's if you wanted to do quadratic formula. And then you would just plug these into your formula. All right, but again, taking the square roots was the best way to go about it. All right, got us our answer the fastest. All right. All right, so now let's get into some of these where we're going to simplify. All right, I said I'd do evens with you guys, so let's look at number 14. All right, how do we simplify something like this? Okay, let's distribute the negative, right? Let's make everything negative. Change the sign of everything. So we get 3 plus 4i minus 5 plus 3i. All right, and now you combine real with the real. So 3 minus 5 is going to get you negative 2. Imaginary with the imaginary. 4i plus 3i is going to get you 7i. Right, and that's all you have to do for this one. Right, no need to make it any more complicated. All right, something like number 16 now. Right, how are we going to simplify this? Okay, yeah, all you have to do for this one is distribute the negative 5. All right, negative 5 times 3 is just going to get you negative 15. Negative 5 times negative 2i is going to get you a positive 10i. All right, that's all you have to do for that one. All right, so now let's try number 18. All right, how are we going to do number 18? Okay, yeah, let's write it twice in FOIL. Right, I keep saying you cannot distribute the square and do 4 squared plus 2i squared. Right, a lot of you still do that. Right, you need to write it twice and FOIL it. All right, so you get 4 plus 2i times 4 plus 2i. All right. And then you do 4 times 4, you get 16. 4 times 2i is 8i. 2i times 4 is another 8i. And 2i times 2i is 4i squared. Now, what do we do when we see an I squared?
It means negative.
Okay, so I squared is negative 1. When we're combining like this, we can cross out the I squared, replace it with its opposite. Right, so plus 4i squared becomes minus 4, right? Real number 4. And now you just combine real with the real. So 16 minus 4 is going to get you 12. Imaginary with the imaginary. 8i plus 8i is going to get you 16i. Okay, so we got a couple more. Right, let's try number 20 on the next page. So we have 2 plus 3i over 2 minus 3i, and we're asked to simplify this. Right, how would we simplify something like this?
You multiply 2x plus 3x. 2 plus 3x.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, very good. Right, so we want to multiply the top and the bottom by the conjugate of the bottom. Remember, the conjugate is just the same numbers, just with an opposite sign in the middle. Right, so the conjugate of 2 minus 3i is going to be 2 plus 3i. Right, and what's the bottom going to become? What was our shortcut?
Real number squared and
Okay.
the number and the op squared.
Okay, very good. So we can square the 2, square our real number, and square the real part of our imaginary, and add them together. All right, so you get 2 squared plus 3 squared. And on the top, you want to FOIL. All right, so 2 times 2 is going to get you 4. 2 times 3i should get you 6i. 3i times 2 is going to get you 6i. And 3i times 3i is going to get you 9i squared. But once again, what do you do with that I squared?
It equals -1, so
Mhm.
change the sign.
Good. Cross it out and change the sign in front. All right, so now on the top, we can do the real plus the real. So 4 minus 9 should get you -5, and then 6i plus 6i imaginary with the imaginary should get you 12i. And on the bottom, 2 squared is 4, plus 3 squared is 9, so we get 4 plus 9, which is just 13. Right, if we're being asked to write it in standard form, I didn't write that on this slide, but all your answers should be in standard form. All you have to do is just split it up into a real number plus an imaginary. Okay, so we don't put the I in the denominator because when you FOIL this out, it should just cancel out. All right, so the point of, you could FOIL it out and get 2 times 2, which is 4. A squared plus b squared is the bottom. Right. Yeah, so if you FOIL it out, you could do that, but then it's going to simplify to just a squared plus b squared. The I should cancel out. All right, so now let's try 22 now. All right, here we're being asked to simplify square root of -50. All right, anytime you see a negative under the radical, you should do what? Replace it with an I. Right, so cross out that negative, we get I square root of 50. And can we simplify square root of 50?
25 and 2.
Good, right? So we want to do square root of 25, square root of 2. And then square root of 25 is 5. So we should get 5i square root of 2. All right, so last one for the day. Let's try 24. Again, anytime you see a negative under the radical, you should do what? Take on an I. So we get I square root of 5, all right, times I square root of 10. And now let's multiply. I with the I should get you I squared. So I times I gets you I squared. And then square root of 5 and square root of 10. Right, if they're both under the radical, you can multiply 5 times 10 and get square root of 50. I squared, we know that that's -1, so our final answer is just going to be negative. And then square root of 50, we just did that, right? This is going to be 5 square root of 2. Bless you. All right, any questions? All right, so that's all I'm doing with you guys today. I have the other problems in another video. All right, so the odds I did in another class. All right, so you can refer to both of them if you want to complete these, but this is all you have to turn in.